Recording in progress.
Is part of it's fine. Read the book, read small after I read a few pages. Or I got in them.
Hello, testing. Hello, this is Scott in the advanced plans meeting. We're testing the audio video system. Can the folks who are joining remotely hear me okay?
Yes.
Fantastic, thank you.
I know some of them.
We had a short conversation. And I've talked to them, hey, you guys just call
Testing. Good.
Public comments on this, like after, or the items will be interesting.
Right. We're going to hold public comments till the end of the agenda.
60 days towards the end of the items. So it's up to you, whichever way you'd like to do it.
I'd rather hold it till the end. Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Welcome to the Advanced Plans Committee of the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission. I want to welcome everybody. I see we've got several visitors today. We will have an opportunity for you to speak if you have any comments at the end of the agenda. Visitors, if you haven't signed in already, please do so. There's a sign-in sheet right outside the door. At this point, I will take a roll call. Duels present. Warren? No. Joe Johnson? Yes. Hugh Nix? Here. Hartman. Miles is not here. McKay.
Here.
Okay, thank you. The approval of the previous meeting summaries is going to be deferred to our next meeting. They haven't completed that yet, so you can scratch that one on this agenda. So at this point, the first item we're going to discuss is short-term rentals, and I'd like to call on Scott Wadle to make a presentation on that.
Mr. Chairman, before Scott starts on this particular item, you said we're taking no comments until after the meeting, at the tail end of the meeting.
Right, that's the standard procedure on our agenda. Would you wish to do it otherwise?
No, I just don't know the people that are here, if this is the item at issue.
Yeah, I don't know what they're here for.
So,
So why don't we just stick with the
Okay, so
normal
let's stay- all right.
procedure? Okay,
All right, well, good morning, everyone. Scott Wadle from the Planning Department. So what we've done on short-term rentals is based on the feedback that we heard from the Planning Commission meeting a couple of weeks ago. I have tried to streamline the staff reports. We've broken it up into two staff reports, and one of them deals with the zoning code and the MAPC policy about the signs. So those are the two items that you all have a very significant role in. And then the other one is on the municipal code changes. So that is the licensing and the nuisance party house ordinance. And those are ones that you have a advisory role to the city council on. So I've tried to break those up into those two different sections. I've again streamlined the staff report because we heard that there was a lot of information and it was a little bit overwhelming. So we've tried to reduce that. So the background and current practices are included as attachments to the staff report. And the largest section of the staff reports you'll all notice are the public comments that we've received throughout the entire process. So that's just an overview. In terms of the materials too, you've got the two staff reports, but then you've also got a document that highlights the changes that have been made to the various policies and documents since the MAPC meeting. And you'll notice that the majority of those changes are related to the licensing proposal. And we'll go through those one at a time once we get to that. So with that, I'll ask Ty Ben to please bring up the zoning PowerPoint, and we'll go through that. And that'll give us kind of a launch pad to go into the conversation about the actual document itself. So Ty Ben's working on bringing that up. Overall, in the zoning code proposal, there have not been significant changes or tweaks. The one change that was made was to include all of the definitions that are proposed to go along with this to define what a short-term rental is and other terms that appear now. So here we go. We're going to give this a shot. Let's see if this clicker works. Or we'll try this one. Okay, Ty Ben, I've got neither the keyboard nor the clicker are working. You go, there we go. Next slide. Okay. So the recommendation, what we're recommending that the MAPC do today is initiate the amendment to the zoning code, approve the zoning code amendments. 3, recommend that the governing bodies adopt the same changes, and then 4, recommend or amend the MAPC policy number 20, which is regarding the signage. So we've gone through all of this information last time in terms of process, definitions, et cetera. We've really curtailed this one this time to what's being proposed. In essence, the issue really is that our existing zoning code does not allow for short-term rentals, especially in generally in residential areas, which is where they are majority of them are currently operating. The other issues that we've heard are there's been some neighbor complaints about having short-term rentals in operation. So we're working through that, through the public process of deciding what's the best fit for Wichita. In terms of process, we've had a number of different meetings stretching all the way back to 2021. More recently, the district advisory boards at the end of last year, beginning of this year. We've done some meetings with stakeholders, and then, of course, we went to the MAPC back in April. Okay, short-term rentals, just make sure everyone's on the same page. Talking about generally properties that are listed on Airbnb, VRBO, typically furnished, rented out. And this is a topic that hits the city of Wichita from that touches a lot of different perspectives in terms of our mission for keeping people safe, the economy, growing the economy, dependable infrastructure, and providing conditions for living well. And I think that's why this community conversation is so dynamic. So in terms of the proposed regulations, there are 4 elements. We've already mentioned those. The 2 that we're going to be concentrating on with this portion of the presentation are, again, the Unified Zoning Code and the MAPC policy. So 2 out of the 4. So in terms of the zoning code changes, and the text is attached in the staff report. So the zoning code changes would only take place, affect City of Wichita. And it would distinguish short-term rentals so that they could be permitted by right or an administrative permit. And the administrative permit is not new in the zoning code, but it's currently just used for wireless cell towers. And so this would expand that use to allow staff to be able to issue those for short-term rentals. In terms of how the zoning would work, is that there are 5 zoning districts out of 21 that are in the zoning code where an administrative permit would be required. So that's our most common residential zoning district. So all the way from SF10 to MF29, which of course includes SF5 and TF3, which are our most common residential zoning districts. So what would happen is that if a short-term rental is located outside of those 5 zoning districts, it would be allowed by right. If a property was located in one of those 5 zoning districts and it's owner-operated short-term rental or owner-occupied, so that the owner's present, think of maybe a house with a carriage house or an in-law suite, maybe in the backyard. So that would be allowed by right. So if it's owner occupied and it's operated as short-term rental, even if it's in those 5 districts, it would be allowed by right. If it is not owner occupied and is located in one of those 5 districts, then it would require an administrative permit. And the way that the administrative permit would operate is that the applicant would come into MAPD, they would fill out the application, they would submit that, would provide staff an opportunity to review it. We would issue letters, and we'll talk about this, to abutting and contiguous properties, which are the properties that touch it or immediately across the street. And then if the owners of those properties would have an opportunity for protest period. If we receive protests representing more than 50% of the owners of those properties, and we'll talk more in depth about this, then it would no longer be an administrative permit. It would convert to being a conditional use case. So we'll talk more about that process. So in terms of the zoning code changes, there would be definitions. It's important to note that bed and breakfast would be rolled into short-term rental, but short-term rental will not include group residence. We know that group residence is a different animal, so to speak. And so that is not going to be included. Neither would it include hotel or motel. It's really there's separate uses. In terms of what's permitted, recreational vehicles, RVs, Airstreams are really cool. I know I've said that before, but the zoning code does not allow for you to have an RV at your property in general today for residential properties. So this would not allow you, the changes we're proposing would not allow you to use an RV for a short-term rental. You'd have to be licensed with the city as a short-term rental license, is what's being proposed. You'd have to have one of those. You'd have to be in compliance with codes. Okay, so this is about the process for the admin permit. So it could be approved administratively, which means that there would be no MAPC review. This is when we would send the letter out to the abutting and contiguous property owners. There would not be a sign. That's what would be entailed in the change to policy number 20 is no development sign application, development application sign, the red and white signs. There'd be a 14-day protest period. And again, if more than 50% of the owners of the adjacent contiguous properties protested, then it would become a conditional use, which means then a sign would be required. Then it would come before the planning commission, and then it would go in front of the district advisory board. So here's some examples about how that would work. We have a separate memo that explains that. That memo is available online. We also handed that out as part of the MAPC packet last time. So when we say abutting and contiguous, this is what we mean. We mean all of the properties that would touch that property, and that includes you minus the streets. You imagine the streets aren't there, so it includes the properties that are across the street that would be touching the property. Now, when we talk about ownership, it's very common for properties to have two individuals listed as the owners. In order to count towards the percentage of owners, we're counting both individuals as one owner combined. So you would have to have signatures on the protest petition by both of the individuals. Whoever's listed on the deed, you would have to have signatures representing all of those individuals to count as one of the owners. So in this case, two people own a property. They both sign, it doesn't count as two owners, it's one owner for the purpose of the calculation. And that is consistent with how we do protest petitions for other zoning cases. So we wanted to keep this as consistent as possible with what we already do. Here is a situation that may arise. So in this instance, the orange property would be applying for the short-term rental. They've come into the office, they filled out the application, we've distributed the letters. The letters, again, go out to any property that is abutting and contiguous, including the ones across the street. Those would be the properties in blue. In this instance, there's a church that owns these three properties. Now, in this instance, they count as one owner, even though there are three properties. So in this case, there's one property owner here, 2, 3, 4, 5, assuming that the houses are all owned by different people. So you would have 5 property owners. So in order to get above the 30%, the 50% threshold, you have to have 3 property owners sign a petition. Is that helpful? Please stop me if there are questions. I'm just kind of rolling along here. In terms of the zoning code, we're proposing that it would have 12 months for short-term rental for property owners to come in compliance with the provisions of the zoning code. And in order to be able to process the applications, we are, as part of our budget proposal to the city and to the county, we're proposing to use the revenue from the applications for the zoning actions for short-term rentals. We're proposing to use that to hire temporary and part-time consultant assistants to process the short-term rental administrative permit applications. And the reason why we're proposing that is because our information from talking to companies that monitor these is that there's somewhere between 500 and 600 of these in Wichita. So we are proposing the 12 months and the consultant in order to give us some breathing room in terms of time to process these. And second, also to give us the manpower in order to be able to work through these as these applications come in. Because what's going to happen is in zoning, the approvals run with the land unless there's something specific that takes place for that case. So once they're approved, we likely will not see another application for that property for that same purpose. So this is a one-time rush of applications that we anticipate. The other scenarios, so we do look at, we plan for the best, and we are, in this case, we're also looking at what would be a worst case scenario. So if we ran into a situation where there were a large number of short-term rental administrative permits that were protested above the 50% threshold, what some options that we would have would be to meter the number of short-term rental cases that come before you on the MAPC meeting agendas. So we would establish a cap on how many of those particular cases would come forward to you at a certain time. Now, fully knowing that that would push out. So if we do 3 this meeting and 3 the next meeting, if we get 9 of them that roll in, we know we've got 3 meetings worth to work through. The other thing too would be that we could request of you all to have a special MAPC meeting to go through those cases if we had a bunch that stacked up. And then the final option, which I do not, I hope that we don't get there, is if we find that we're simply overwhelmed and none of these other shortfalls or options are addressing that, we could request a moratorium. But I don't anticipate going there, but I do want to give you the sense of confidence that we have a number of tools that are available in order to address it if we should see a large number of these become controversial. Okay, so that's the zoning code. I'm going to pause there and ask, are there any questions on the zoning code portion? Because the next one is the policy, which is fairly small.
Scott,
Yes, sir.
the petitions would come to the MAPC, not the Advanced Plans Committee, right?
Oh, in terms of protests, you mean?
Right.
For yes. So if it was protested above 50%, it would become a standard conditional use case and it would go to the MAPC. You would not see them here
Right.
at Advanced Plans. Yeah.
The other thing is on this, could I see a show of hands of the public that's here, that are people that are interested in hearing this case? Well, it seems like most of you do want to hear this case. So at the end of Scott's presentation, and after we've had our discussion on this, I will invite public comment. And I'd remind you that you've got 3 minutes to talk and you need to state your name and address. That's all I've got.
Thank you.
John?
Scott, would you kind of explain the zoning thing on home in reference to homeowners associations?
Sure. So I like to think of it as kind of layers of regulations. You've got federal, state, local, you've got county, municipal, and then you've got HOAs. So in this case, anything that gets applied at the city level that we've talked about here with the zoning, it does not impact HOAs. So homeowner associations are another level of regulation. They can impose bans on short-term rentals within the HOA, and that will still apply even if these changes are adopted to the zoning code. So it does not modify what HOAs have in place, nor does it prevent them from establishing their own regulations on short-term rentals.
With anything else with associations like this, enforcement becomes an internal matter. It's not our responsibility to enforce homeowners association rules.
Absolutely. Yes, that's correct, Mr. Warren. The other thing too that I would point out is that there is enforcement on the city side in terms of enforcing the zoning code. And as part of that, what we are proposing to do, and we'll talk more about that with licensing, is that we're proposing to use a portion of the licensing revenue to fund a part-time position in the zoning enforcement division here in the planning department, and also to contract with a company that would provide services to monitor where short-term rentals are and whether or not they are in compliance with the policies. And the intent behind this, there have been some questions that have come up about this. The intent between both the permit or the application fees and the licensing fees is that There would be no general fund, city or county subsidy for the activities of monitoring or enforcing short-term rentals, nor would there be a subsidy from the short-term rentals towards the operations or general fund of the city or the county. So it's really to keep them in their own segregated funding accounts. Okay,
You mentioned having an outside consultant review the cases, or would they be hired just at the beginning of this, or would that be a position that carries on later on, or it depends on the
I
non-consultants?
yeah, it depends on the volume, but I propose that as someone to help us out with the initial rush of cases, knowing that there's between 500 and 600 of them out there. Yep. So not seeing any more hands up, I'm going to continue on to the policy. Oh, yes, sir.
Scott, I should know this, but I mean, use the word city. This is just city, not county.
That's correct. So it affects just the city. It just applies to the city of Wichita. But I mentioned the county just because it is a joint city and county code, and we are a joint city and county department. So I just want to make sure everyone's clear that the county, there's no county funding that's proposed to be involved in this. Okay, well, with that, I'll move on to the policy so we can cover that as well. So this is the second thing that the MAPC has substantial involvement in terms of authority about whether or not to approve it. So this is your own policy at the MAPC. Currently, the policy does require applicants to post a development application sign, as you can see here, on the property prior to public hearing. In this case, what we want to do is we're proposing that policy would be updated to very clearly indicate that administrative permit applications for short-term rentals are not required to post that sign. And that is in response to comments and feedback that we've heard about concerns about having a fully furnished home out there without necessarily occupants in it, and just concerns about making that highly visible for folks.
God,
Yes, sir.
if there is a protest petition viable, then
Yep.
we go back to the sign has to go up.
That's exactly right. Yes, sir. Yep. Okay, so those are those two items. Again, the recommended actions, which are listed in the staff report. With that, I'm going to ask Ty Ben to switch over to the licensing PowerPoint, and we will go through that one. That one should go a little bit faster at the beginning because we've covered a lot of those similar slides with the zoning one. Okay, I've labeled this municipal code because there are two portions in here. We'll get to what those are. And we're going to cruise through a number of slides here. Okay, so again, the four elements that are being discussed today. So this is going to cover licensing and the municipal code. So in terms of licensing would be an ordinance, would be a change to the municipal code, but I think most people refer to it as the licensing. So that's how I'm referring to it. So there would be an annual license that would be required for short-term rentals. The fee for that we're proposing is $225. And that covers administrative costs of processing the application. It covers contracting with a company to monitor them. And it also covers the cost of inspections, should there be an inspection for a notice of an issue at a property. And it would also cover the part-time position in zoning enforcement. And these are, again, just highlights from what's in the licensing. It would require maintenance of insurance for the unit. They would also have to include the license number and all the marketing materials. So we want to make sure that people are compliant with that when they're advertising. There's a good neighbor policy that would be posted in each of the units. And okay, and then the maximum occupancy, subject of discussion at the outset for short-term rentals, would be 2 adults per bedroom plus 2 adults per unit. So you add up the number of bedrooms, multiply that by 2, and then add an additional 2. And then a gathering maximum of 20 persons or less, and it would depend, that's based on the occupancy is why it might be less. And that goes until 10 PM. And the intent there is to keep from having large gatherings that, be disruptive for neighbors. And then that there would be a contact available who could respond to the property within 30 minutes, 24/7. And that was one of the comments that we heard was, well, it's well and good that there's a requirement to have this contact person, responsible party. But what are they responsible to do? And so we've inserted in there that they should be able to respond and get to the property within 30 minutes. Should an issue arise and they get contacted. In terms of licensing, there's also, the city would have the right to inspect. One of the comments that we heard, some of the feedback also was about the kind of due process and private property rights. So what we've done is we've clarified that for the inspections, we've updated it so that exterior inspections can be done at any time, but the interior inspections, there would be a 72-hour notice period that would apply. Now, that doesn't apply if there's egregious or emergency situations, and that's the same conditions as if there was a single family house that if there's an emergency condition, we can go in and inspect it immediately. But in this instance, for less severe violations, there'd be a 72-hour notification period. They would have to be in compliance with all the codes. At one point, early on in the discussion, there was a inclusion of a separation distance requirement of 600 feet. That is not included. That was not included last time you saw it at the MAPC. It's not included today. Also, last time at the MAPC, we talked about whether or not there should be written notice to the properties within 200 feet. That has been removed, and that was removed based on kind of the feedback and comments that we received about how that would be could be redundant with the zoning notification. The other thing about this is that notification would really just be a courtesy because there's no protest process or opportunity through this for neighbors to provide feedback about whether or not a short-term rental is appropriate at that location. That really happens as part of the zoning portion. Okay, there's language in there about enforcement. And one of the things that we are working on and we continue to work on is that for a denial of license, and in your paperwork, it's on page 20 on the licensing section, it talks about if a license has been suspended, that within 5 years of that suspension, you can be denied a license. We continue to work through that, but where I think we're arriving at is that we're going to be modifying that to say that you would only be denied if it is currently in suspension. So we're working towards that one. That's where we are in the conversation. Okay, so there's other conditions that could lead to a revocation of a license and also an appeal process. An appeal would go to the city council. Okay, licensing. That is the general overview. What I want to do is I want to go through and make sure I've touched on all the bullet points of what has changed since you saw it last time. Okay, so I'm switching over to this memo document. It's just 2 pages, one page, front and back. So the first one under short-term rental licensing ordinance. So we've clarified what a responsible party is responsible to do should they be contacted. That's the first bullet point. The second one, we've clarified, just inserted a statement that it's a violation, unlawful for any of these individuals, owner, responsible party, or other person to violate the terms and conditions. So just a clarifying statement in that section. The next one is clarification about 30 days to rectify situation that would lead to a suspension. The next bullet point, first one on the second page, is removal of the requirement for notice to adjacent owners. And again, that's still in the zoning update. The next bullet point is that liability insurance can be obtained from a third party or booking platform. And some of the platforms will provide insurance to the operators themselves. We want to make sure that it's clear that that can be used. The next one then is there's a requirement for a diagram of the premise. That is still included, but we want to make sure that it's very clear that you don't need to have an engineer develop that. We're just looking for a diagram that illustrates where there are rooms, where there are common areas. And in fact, I believe that that's something that most properties can get as part of from the appraiser, if I remember correctly. So it just needs to be it doesn't need to be to scale or engineered. Second to last one is we removed the requirement for the social security number from the application form. We know that there were some privacy concerns with that. We did keep the birth date though. And that's because in case we have people with the similar names or the same name. And then again, the last one there is the 72 hours notice prior to interior inspections. So you will see all of those changes in the text. There is one typo that I want to bring to your attention, and that is on page 27 in the licensing. We mentioned that they have 6 months to come into compliance. That should be 12 months to come into compliance with the licensing. And that is so that it matches up with the zoning period of time that people have to come into compliance. So that is the licensing portion. The next one then is party house ordinance. It sounds like a lot of fun, but it's really about nuisance party houses. So any questions on licensing? Yeah.
Scott, what constitutes interior inspection? Just a couple examples.
Yeah, so an interior inspection, what would be, it depends on what the complaint is that the city receives. I could see something like maybe someone's in there and the hand railing on the stairway falls off or something. That would be something where MABCD and code inspection would go in. Maybe there's one where there's a door that doesn't operate well and it creates a fire hazard. So fire department might go in. So we see there are really 3 agencies, I believe, that would be involved. It'd be MABCD. So for like building code issues, you would have fire for fire code issues. And then you could have planning if there's a specific planning thing. But I don't know that we would necessarily be interior. I think fire and MABCD are the most likely ones.
How do you go about getting a complaint? Just curious.
How do we?
How do you go about getting so I rent this place and then I call you up and say, I call someone up and say,
Yep.
hey, the hand railing falling off and I about fell down the stairs and
Yeah,
I'm not happy.
exactly. At that point, let's say the city of Wichita receives a call into, our general call line, or someone looks up online and finds out the planning department's responsible for monitoring these. Then they give us a call and say, hey, I think you guys got a safety issue here. And then we would address it. Yep. Yeah, Mr. McKay.
One question going back to the way you've got it set up on the licensure, it sounds like individuals going to get their own individual license, each one.
They would have to license each unit. So every short-term rental will have to have its own license.
Understand it. So what if I've got 2 or 3 of them here in Wichita and I decide I don't have time to take care of them, so I hire somebody to do it, tell us the responsibility where it lies and falls there.
Okay, well, in that instance, there's a question that would come up about, are you going to be able to respond as the responsible party? And so let's say if you move to Arizona, you're obviously not within 30 minutes of Wichita. So you would have to, you would still own it, you would still have the license, but you would have to make sure to update that license to have the name and contact information of the responsible party that we could reach should there be an issue.
Well, the reason I asked the question, because back earlier you showed 3 or 4 different companies that do this.
Mm-hmm.
And so do they do the licensure?
No, they would not. It's up to the owner or owners of the unit to license.
So then there couldn't be 2 or 3 different owners went together, put like 4 or 5 units together, hired a company. The individuals have to themselves make application for the license.
That's correct. The owners need to apply for the license. Okay, not seeing any more questions. I'm gonna go ahead and take you through the party house one. It's very, very short. I think really referring to the document is best there, but this is meant to address, again, nuisance gatherings of, I think there's a specific size in terms of the size of the gathering. It's 5 or more people. And if there's conduct that's going on at the property that is defined as a nuisance, and that is some of them include property damage, littering, maybe going to the restroom outside, threatening to injure someone or damage property. These are all things then that the police department could respond to, and what they could do is they could tell people to vacate the property, and that can be effective immediately. So this allows them to disperse people from the property. This is following on what some other jurisdictions here in Kansas have done. So we've seen this get applied, and we think we're proposing this to help address some of the concerns that we've heard from the public. So with that, those are the 4 elements that we're talking about. So the zoning code, the MAPC policy, the licensing of short-term rentals, and then nuisance party house ordinance. Those are the 4 things. Are there any other questions on those? Okay.
Thank you, Scott. And are there any questions from the MAPC commissioners of Scott at this point? If not, I would invite public comment on this. Again, you're limited to 3 minutes. Please state your name and address. Yes. Well, yeah, what we're being asked to do is to recommend approval of these 4 points, and I'll go back over that when we get done with comments, and then it's going to go to the MAPC today, right, Scott?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd like to add some more color and context to that. So when the MAPC heard it a couple of meetings ago, I think what I heard, what I took away from that is, hey, this is complex. There's a lot of moving pieces. We'd really appreciate the advanced plans looking at this. And that gives an opportunity for folks to look at it more in depth. So I think that's really what today is about, is give you all an opportunity to dig into it. And as always, share that knowledge and insight with the full MAPC. We've put it on the MAPC agenda in anticipation that you might want to talk about it. If we get to that point, and well, we'll see. You've got the option of this afternoon of taking action on it, but it's always an option. That is correct. I would assume yes.
We always give the public an opportunity to speak at these meetings, even though it's not the full MAPC. So again, if anyone would like to make comment at this time, please come forward. You have 3 minutes.
Patricia Heilman, 139 South Fountain, 67218. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you also very much for dealing with this issue, because this has been a long time where we've just not had any structure or stuff. And the planning department has done a great job addressing a lot of the concerns that I have. I'm on the board of Wichita Independent Neighborhoods, and I also represent, I am a part of the College Hill Neighborhood Association, and live in College Hill, just for some, my perspective. So one of the big things that I would like you to consider is that the zoning process and the licensing process, when you removed in the licensing process the notice to neighbors, that I understand, and I understand why it's sort of a duplication of process kind of thought. But my concern as a neighbor is making sure that we are staying neighborhoods and not investment districts, right, with our zoning process. So my thought process right here, as I've been just literally today thinking this through, is can our zoning process that we're asking for this short-term rental zoning, can it be kept to that owner. Because it is very important for neighbors, if the owner of that property is Bob Smith, who I know is conscientious and is awesome, I, as a neighbor, do not have any qualms that they're going to run a great Airbnb. Now, if that zoning stays to that property in perpetuity, 2-3 owners later, there could be real issues that now I need input as a neighbor to have, but I don't have it anymore because that zoning process happened 10 years ago. And now there's no way for me to say, no, stop. This is not a good fit for our neighborhood anymore. So is there a way that we can make the zoning approval a little bit more like a licensure? And I understand there's process that you have to deal with, but can it be a zoning approval that each owner has to go through so that neighbors have the input on what's happening? And we're also not getting people who want to increase the value of their property. And so applying for short-term rental zoning permission, even if they're not today running it, but they want to increase their property value. And then we're creating maybe even districts of short-term rentals that turn a neighborhood a little bit more into like a hotel zone. That would I see be a pretty negative thing for Wichita and for neighborhoods. And then I'm also very concerned about a 14-day protest petition that deals only with the mail, because I just got mail. It was 7 days in Wichita to get that mail. And so if somebody's mailing a protest back, that's cutting it pretty darn close. So for a mail only, no sign process, can we have it 24 days? Anyway, those are I don't see a timer, so I don't know what time I've got. I apologize.
You're right at 3 minutes
Okay,
now. Thank you
thank
for
you.
your comments.
Sure.
We'll give Scott an opportunity to respond to some of these questions once we get through everybody's comments. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Please state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Jack Patton. I live at 337 South Rattan. This brought up more questions than answers for me. One is the hotel motel versus short-term rental. Isn't that one and the same? And why are we splitting it off? Short-term rental, that's a no-tell motel to me. So maybe I just don't understand the subtleties of it. No signs on the property for the change in request. I go back to, what are you hiding? I mean, if you don't want people to know, this is a good way to not let the neighborhood know. Because it doesn't always just affect the folks right next door, but it also affects the property and the people across the street, around the block, as evidenced by the reason this was all brought together was because of the party and the shootings. So just because I'm not next door doesn't mean I don't have an interest. And if you don't tell me, it's going to be just, what are you hiding? That's the big thing. I didn't see any options in there to remove these people if they become a blight on the neighborhood. Yeah, you can call the police, but that doesn't mean they're going to show up. And as far as reporting stuff that goes inside the building, it's a rental. It's a motel. You're not going to call the city and say, oh, there's an issue. Rentals in a neighborhood, and to drag things down just a little bit, is Airbnb going to be a little bit worse because there's nobody there on the property. And my biggest concern is the city losing an interest in enforcement on the backswing. I don't know how many times that, oh, well, we got this great new thing, and as soon as it's off and around the corner, it's like a taillight guarantee. As soon as it's out of sight and out of mind, nobody gives a flip. And I'm saying that as a former city inspector. So that's just my concerns. One is why you're hiding stuff, and is the city really going to follow through? It's not always what the city does. Is sometimes it comes down to what the city fails to do in the aftermath. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Is there any other speakers? Please state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
Hey, good morning. Lonnie Barnes at 2924 North Terrace Drive here in Wichita, Kansas. So just a couple quick 3 questions here. On these short-term rentals in here, handicap accessibility. I don't know if that falls under which department it falls upon, but do they have to have that? Because it could be a complaint comes in. Well, I couldn't get in the bathroom, or I couldn't get up the steps in here. Is there a requirement for handicap accessibility? Apartment units. So I get concerned over here in Wichita State. We got all these apartments going up, and some of them want to convert their not only apartments, they want to turn some of their units into Airbnbs. How many they can have, and how do those regulate with the neighbors and the people living around them in the apartments? And here, not sure what the $250 liability insurance covers. Is that bodily injury, personal injury, property? What type of insurance are you asking them to have? Okay.
Thank you, sir. Do we have anyone else who would like to speak? Please state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Gentry Thiessen. I am the Government Affairs Director with the Realtors of South Central Kansas, and our office address is 170 West Dewey here in Wichita. I just wanted to come up and say that I think that the city has been a really great partner in working with us, the Realtors, to try and address some of our concerns. Last month at the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission meeting, we did present you a whole list, and I think the city has done a really great job in addressing those, specifically the inspections. I would say that we appreciate what you've done and what you've taken to look at this. And we understand it's not been an easy process and it's been a long one, but I think it's what's in the best interest for our city. And I appreciate what you've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Please state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Jason Kraus. I live at 243 North Pinecrest. I spoke at the last MAPC meeting as well. And I do want to thank Scott, JR, and the team for working with us very extensively ever since that first event in April that brought this, April 21, that brought this to the head. Again, the event happened quite literally in my backyard, catty corner behind me, and the unfortunate victim was visible from my bathroom window. So I've been tremendously impacted by all of these things, and I really appreciate the help that the city is starting to give us with these regulations. A couple of key points around clarification. I'd like to ask that we clarify what are the regulations during the intervening period from when this passes until licensing is required in that 12-month period. Is the 7-day limit going to stay in place, for example? What we have notified in there in the enforcement penalty process. So I appreciate that. I'm going to follow up and dig deeper and make sure I understand that process. In the documentation, section 9, part D around enforcement seems to be incomplete. I'd advise you to look into that language and see if there's something missing around what constitutes a violation. It seems incomplete in there. And also just another question, why are we not inspecting before approval? Why are we waiting for a complaint to inspect that? We inspect businesses as they, before they are, licensed to operate. These are inherently commercial interests. These are no longer residential properties with a non-owner occupied property. And I advise us to include that in that we need to inspect this beforehand to ensure the safety of people that are coming to stay. And so that would follow a process. The neighbors need to approve, then we need to inspect as we, proceed through our licensing processes. And I would advise as much clarity with the public as possible through these pieces. As it was said during the MAPC meeting last week, we had Airbnb owners that very bravely, I would add on their part, attested to the fact that they are literally knowingly not following the current regulations. We need to have teeth enough in this regulation and within our processes to ensure compliance and ensure the safety and the sanctity of these neighborhoods, as we mentioned. And as I spoke at that last meeting, I want neighbors. I'm not against somebody renting a house, but I would prefer that they're going to be here for 6 months to a year. I want neighbors. I run a neighborhood parade every 4th of July. Y'all are welcome. 10:30, 4th of July, we meet at my house, 243 North Pinecrest. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, but we'll have drinks afterwards.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak at this time? Is there anyone virtually that would like to speak? Is there anyone virtually? At this time, then I'd like to invite Scott to come back up and respond to some of the questions.
All right. Well, I think those are very helpful comments and some really great questions. So I'm going to address the ones that I can, and I'm going to use the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and call for help as JR and Jeff Van Zandt, and Sharon is online as well. I see Jeff doesn't make eye contact while I'm saying that. All right, very good. So let's see. One was a comment about the notification and the process. So comment there. Another second one was then, can the zoning approval be kept just to the particular owner of the property? And Jeff, I'm going to turn to you for your insights on that one.
No, our policy has always been that the zoning applies to the land itself, not the owner.
Not to the owner.
So they would run with the land. We
Okay.
can't change that.
Okay. Yes, sir.
That's statutory.
Okay.
And again, that's zoning, that's not licensing.
That's correct.
Jeff, did you say that have to be changed?
No, I said it's statutory, so we couldn't change that to where it would run with the applicant, not the land itself.
City itself cannot change?
No, because it's state statute.
And I think that goes back to, then it becomes more about the individual as opposed to actually the use of the land, which is what the zoning is about. Okay. Let's see. Can the protest be 24 days? Legally, I think yes, it can be. It's just a matter of what's the best fit for Wichita. Jeff?
Yeah, we kept it 14 because on the protest petition, right now in the code is 14 days. And the same requirement as far as it being mailed in, and I know it's snail mail, we have accepted email submissions. We had to start doing that during COVID. So there are ways to get it here within that time frame.
Did you say snail mail?
Sorry.
And just to clarify, to build off of what Jeff has said on that, the protest petition, so that's the protest petition for all zoning cases, conditional use, regular zone changes, PUDs, CUPs, all of them are 14 days at this point. And is that postmarked?
It's the receipt of the protest petition, and it's 14 days following the date of the hearing.
Mr.
Yeah,
Johnson?
statutorily, this says dated postmark.
Okay. Let's see, some more questions that we had were, I think there was a comment about, the posting of the sign and whether or not that should be required for the administrative permit. What about options for removing these folks? I think that was in comment to what if, a disturbance or something is taking place. In part, I think that's what the change for the nuisance party house allows, is for the immediate dispersal. But in terms of the response times by the police, it's not really something I can speak to. It's just we are providing them with the tools that they to be able to do that in an expedited fashion. Let's see. Question about short-term rentals and handicapped accessibility. The short-term rentals would have to comply with the ADA requirements set forth for that type of building is my understanding, and I'll look to Jeff and JR for. Okay. So there are certain standards that, hotel, like commercial, more larger scale structures have to comply with. There are certain standards for single family homes. What about the parking requirements? The parking requirements would go with the underlying zoning. So for instance, there are specific, and also the use. So there are specific tables in the zoning code that list a particular use and how many parking spaces are required, or also the zoning district may have specific requirements. In terms of the liability insurance, that is in case someone should become injured on the property and there should be a claim against the property owner, that they would have insurance against that. So in case of the hand railing as an example, and someone falls and gets injured. Let's see. Oh, clarification on the regulations during the 12-month period between when things would go into place and when it would be required. So for licensing, they would have 12 months, so they could still continue to operate for that period of time, for that 12 months. For the zoning code, what we would do is that we would, and JR, I'm going to look to you to confirm this, but those that are in operation currently would be grandfathered in for that 12-month period. Those that want to start after a specific date and time that we would need to identify would not be able to start until they had received the zoning permission, the zoning approval that they need to do it. And JR, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, that's correct, as well as their license. So absolutely.
And in terms of the date effective, so people would need to be able to bring in evidence that they had, receipts or documentation to show that it had been in operation before this was adopted, to be able to say that they should be grandfathered in for that period. Now, that's not to guarantee that they will be approved in the future. They would still have 12 months to get that zoning approval. And if they cannot get that or are denied, then they would have to cease operation. And the 7-day requirement currently, if this change to the zoning code is adopted, that 7-day stay would not apply once this is adopted. Okay, I think that addresses the questions. There were a number of statements and comments, but I think this addresses the questions.
There was a question regarding the difference between a short-term rental and a hotel motel, and that is addressed in the zoning code, right?
It is. They are different uses, and I'll look to JR if he wants to add any further definition to it.
I would say that in practice, they're pretty much the same thing, but in our code, they are not. They're two different things. Hotel motel is a commercial operation in a commercially zoned area, and a short-term rental is a place for short-term stays in a residentially zoned area in essence, or at least in residential dwelling, because we do have residential dwellings in heavier districts. Most of these will probably be in SF5 or TF3.
And looks like Jeff's got a couple.
Yeah, there was one other question pertaining to apartment complexes, and if I'm not mistaken, each apartment would be a unit.
That's right.
It's not like the whole apartment building would be one application. It would be for each of the units.
That's right.
I kind of like to, one of the speakers talked about trying to hide something without the signs, and I don't think that's very appropriate. I don't think it has anything to do with what the process is going to be. I think it's streamlining the process, in my opinion, primarily because it's for ownership only is who the notification goes to, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So I'll bring it back to the commission for any further discussion. You can address your questions to Scott if you have anything. Is there any further discussion? Okay, if not, I'm going to read this. We are being asked to recommend that the full MAPC enact the four following items. Initiate an amendment to the Unified Zoning Code per Unified Zoning Code Article VC2. Second one is approve the proposed Unified Zoning Code amendments. And 3 is endorse the Wichita Municipal Code changes. And 4 is to amend the MAPC Policy 20. Do I hear a motion to approve that?
For approval or just for
All right,
hearing?
well, to recommend to the MAPC. That's what they've asked us to do.
Without the-
To recommend it, not to approve it.
But without them having the input that we've had here today, I think discussion like we've had for approval, not recommend to approve.
Okay. You want to make a motion to that effect?
So move.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Does that change the ability of the full MAPC to, okay?
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, the same sign. Motion carries. Okay, Scott, I think you're back on for project updates.
Sure. One thing I'd point out is that by that action, you're recommending, you've provided a recommendation on the zoning code and the policy. I don't know if you want to weigh in on the licensing and the nuisance party house. You don't have to, but those are there's a second staff report that has the actions for that. So,
Okay, I'm sorry.
You're doing just
looking at
fine.
4
It's a-
items on here on both of these.
yeah.
We lost one commissioner here temporarily. I would recommend a motion to include that. Does anybody have a problem with that? Should we take another vote?
I thought the previous motion covered those 2 items since it was mere recommendation. Did I miss something?
No, it was there's 2 staff reports and there's 4 actions on the particular zoning one related to the zoning and the policy. Then there's a second one with actions for licensing and the municipal
You
code.
might want to wait for Mr. McKay to come back to see the intent of his motion.
Okay, number 1 looks to me to be the same wording. Number 2 looks like the same wording. Number 3
Oh, there should be.
different on the second report.
There should be one of the reports, the proposed changes on the line up at the top. There's a line proposed changes. One deals with the zoning code.
Oh, okay.
One deals with rental licensing and nuisance party house.
So these are 2 separate items that we're bringing before.
Essentially, yes, we've broken it up into 2 just for ease of processing it.
Okay. So would you recommend that we take a vote on the second one as well?
You don't have to, but I think it could be assigned to the MAPC because they'll look to you all for, I think they'll defer to you for guidance on how to, on how to process that this afternoon.
Well, what's your pleasure? Does anybody have a problem with including this in the first motion and that we approved 2 applications that were presented to us today, or do we want to take a second vote? Yeah, so now there's 2 things that were presented, 2 applications. One was changes to the city code and the second one was a request that involved party houses and what?
I don't care one, as a motion maker of the first motion, makes no difference to me, but I think it all falls in line,
Right.
hand in hand together, the overall, and then we can, at the planning commission, if you want to separate them out, is it a motion, we could do that.
And then I would suggest in the minutes that we record that both of these were approved in one motion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, and at the planning commission, you'll see them as two items for two separate actions, so it'll be very clear there. But this is helpful because then I can help relay that information. You'll be there, of course, too, but I can relay that information to the full MAPC. So,
Okay, sir.
all right, on the updates, project updates, I've got to ask for forgiveness on this one because I did not get that prepared in time for today. So what I will commit to do is getting a typed up report with our case numbers and getting that to you after this meeting. The one thing that I would bring to your attention, though, is that you've seen that the agendas have been very robust since we advanced plans met last time. They are going to continue to be robust. I think we had a closing date fairly recently that we saw again somewhere like 15 cases come in. So we're staying very busy. In terms of staffing, we've got good news in that we've interviewed an individual to fill the associate planner's position in the current plans division. And the interview went really well. And so we're looking forward to making an offer to bring that individual in. And that one is so important because they will be learning from Neil about the subdivision process and to carry that forward after he retires in January. So those are my highlights, and we're just staying busy as always, and I'll get you a report in writing that has a little bit more detail to it.
Thanks. Thank you for your work on this, Scott.
You bet. Thank you.
Are there any other comments from the public other than the item that we've already covered on short-term rentals? If not, then I think we will stand adjourned, and our next meeting is going to be June 8th. Thank you.